The winter of 1878 came to Montana Territory like a judgment. Snow fell in sheets so thick a man could lose himself walking from house to barn. The wind carried voices that weren't there, whispers of the dead mixing with the living until you couldn't tell which was which. Some folks said it was the coldest winter in memory. Others said it was the land itself turning hostile, rejecting those who'd claimed it without permission. Caleb Hart stood at the window of his ranch house, watching dawn break gray and merciless over the valley. 6 weeks since the last housekeeper had died. 8 months since Eleanor. The house behind him was silent in a way that made his skin crawl.
Not peaceful silence. The silence of a tomb. His daughter Sarah sat at the kitchen table, 10 years old, with eyes that had seen too much. She was speaking again, but only in Apache, words she'd learned from a Chiricahua prisoner woman who'd worked briefly at the neighboring ranch before dying of the same fever that had taken everyone else. The child spoke the language of her mother's killers with more comfort than she spoke her own tongue. Caleb didn't know if that was grief or madness or something worse. Thomas, 5 years old, had stopped sleeping. The boy sat in corners drawing pictures of graves and shadow figures with hollow eyes. When Caleb tried to take the charcoal away, Thomas screamed until he vomited. So Caleb let him draw. What else could he do? Ruth, barely 3, had simply stopped. Stopped eating more than a few bites. Stopped playing. Stopped being a child. She asked for her mama a dozen times a day in a voice so small it barely qualified as sound. And every time, Caleb's heart broke again because he had no answer that would satisfy. The ranch was dying around them. Fences needed mending. The barn door hung crooked on broken hinges. The garden had gone to seed and frost. Caleb worked when he could, but grief had weight. It pressed down on his shoulders until some mornings he couldn't rise from bed. The animals were fed because they had to be. The children were fed because they had to be. But there was no life in any of it, just the mechanical repetition of survival. 6 housekeepers in 6 months. The first 2 had quit within weeks, unable to handle the isolation and the broken family they'd found. Fair enough. Caleb had expected that. But the 3rd had died of the fever in her 4th week. Then the 4th. Then the 5th. Then the 6th. Martha Whitfield had been the 6th. A sturdy woman of 48 with kind eyes and capable hands. She'd lasted 3 weeks before the fever took her. Caleb had buried her on the hill behind the house, alongside Eleanor and the others. 6 graves in a neat row. A testament to failure. The doctor from Clarkston had no explanation. Mountain fever, he called it. Some new strain of illness that seemed to target women of a certain age. But his eyes had been uncertain. His hands had shaken when he examined the bodies, and he'd left quickly each time, as if afraid the sickness might be catching. The Blackfoot woman who did washing for the territorial marshal had a different explanation. She'd come once to collect laundry and had refused to enter the house. She'd stood in the yard, wrapped in blankets against the cold, and spoken in broken English about angry spirits and blood debt. The land was cursed, she said, built on bones that had not been honored. The dead were taking revenge. Caleb was a practical man, a man of ledgers and fence posts and breeding stock. He didn't believe in curses. But practical men buried their wives. Practical men watched housekeepers die of mysterious fevers. Practical men ran out of explanations when 6 women died in 6 months in the same house. He'd posted another notice in Clarkston. Woman wanted for household work. 3 children. Remote location. Good pay. No questions asked about circumstances. That last line was important. Respectable women didn't answer advertisements from widowers. Only the desperate came. Only those with nowhere else to go. For 3 weeks, no one answered. Clarkston was a dying town in a dying territory. Most folks with sense had moved on to Idaho or California. Those who remained were either too stubborn or too poor to leave. And even the desperate had standards. Everyone had heard about the Heart House by now, the place where women went to die. Caleb was considering taking the children and leaving, abandoning the ranch Eleanor and he had built over 10 years of back-breaking work, starting over somewhere the shadows weren't quite so thick. But where would they go? What would they do? This land was all he knew. This house held every memory of Eleanor. Leaving felt like killing her a second time. Sarah appeared beside him, silent as smoke. She did that now, moved through the house like a ghost, startling him a dozen times a day. She spoke in Apache, 3 sentences, her voice flat and certain. Caleb didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. She was telling him something important. Warning him, maybe. "English, Sarah, please." She looked at him with those ancient eyes, then switched languages with visible effort. "Someone is here, in the kitchen, a woman. She didn't knock." Caleb's hand went to the rifle above the door. In 6 months, not one person had come to the house uninvited. The house had a reputation now. People stayed away. He moved through the hall, Sarah following close behind. Thomas appeared from the drawing room, clutching his charcoal and paper. The boy's eyes were wide, but not frightened. Curious, as if he'd been expecting this. The kitchen door was open. The fire in the stove had been dead for 12 hours. Caleb had meant to restart it this morning, but hadn't found the will yet. But now, smoke rose from the chimney. Someone had lit it. Someone had entered his home and made themselves comfortable. He pushed into the kitchen, rifle raised. A woman sat in Eleanor's rocking chair by the cold fireplace. Not by the stove, where the warmth was, but by the dead hearth. She was wrapped in a blanket, hood pulled up, face hidden in shadow. But her hands were visible. Brown skin, long fingers, a bracelet of turquoise and silver on her wrist that caught the weak morning light. "Get out." Caleb's voice came out harder than he'd intended. "This is private property." The woman didn't move, didn't even acknowledge he'd spoken. "I said get out. I've got children here. I don't know what you want, but you need to leave now." Slowly, she pushed back the hood. Her face emerged from shadow like something being born. Copper skin, black hair in 2 long braids. Eyes so dark they seemed to hold their own gravity. She was young, maybe 24, with the kind of beauty that had nothing to do with softness, all angles and intensity. A face carved from necessity rather than vanity. She wore a strange mix of clothing. A wool coat that had clearly belonged to a white woman, patched and repatched. But beneath it, traditional Apache moccasins. A belt with beadwork designs Caleb recognized from the prisoner woman who taught Sarah those words. This woman was Chiricahua, in his house, in the heart of ranching country where Apache meant enemy. "I heard you need someone." Her English was perfect, no accent, no hesitation, as if she'd been born speaking both languages with equal fluency. "I need shelter. We can make an exchange." Caleb should have thrown her out, should have called the marshal. A lone Apache woman showing up at a ranch house was trouble, no matter how you looked at it. But something stopped him. Maybe the calm certainty in her voice.
Maybe the way Sarah had gone still beside him, staring at this stranger with an intensity he hadn't seen in months. "How did you get in here?" "The back door. It wasn't locked." "I locked it last night." "Locks are easy." She said it without pride or shame, just fact. "Your children are in danger. This house is in danger. I can help, if you let me." Thomas stepped forward before Caleb could stop him. The boy walked right up to this strange woman and stared at her with his two old eyes. Then he held out one of his drawings, not to Caleb, to her. She took the paper carefully, studied it. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air of the room. She looked from the drawing to Thomas, to Caleb. "He sees them," she said it quietly. "The dead ones. They talk to him." "That's ridiculous. He's 5 years old. He doesn't see anything but shadows and his own imagination." "Children see what adults refuse to. Your son knows this house is wrong. He's been trying to tell you, but you won't listen." Sarah moved closer. She spoke in Apache, 3 short sentences. The woman responded in the same language, back and forth, a conversation Caleb couldn't follow. Then Sarah turned to him and switched to English. She says, "Mama didn't die from fever. She says someone poisoned her. Someone poisoned all of them." The rifle nearly slipped from Caleb's hands. "What?" "That's what she says. She says she can prove it." The woman stood slowly. She was taller than Eleanor had been, lean and rangy, like someone who'd spent their life walking long distances. She moved with a careful economy, nothing wasted, every gesture purposeful. "My name is Ayanna. 6 months ago, a woman named Martha Whitfield wrote to me. She was working here. She said she thought something was wrong, that women were dying and no one was asking the right questions. She asked me to come if anything happened to her. 3 weeks later, she was dead." Caleb's mouth had gone dry. Martha, the last housekeeper, the one who'd seemed different from the others, stronger, more observant. She'd asked strange questions about the previous deaths, had insisted on seeing Eleanor's medical records, had started keeping a journal. And then she'd died too. "You knew Martha?" "I knew of her. I came because of her." Ayanna's voice was carefully neutral, revealing nothing more. "She left something behind, something that will help us find the truth." "What kind of something?" "Evidence. But we need to find it first." The doctor said fever. Doctors say many things, especially when the alternative is admitting murder. Ayanna moved toward the table. "I've been watching this house for 3 weeks. I've been watching who comes and goes. I've been studying the land around it, and I've found things that will interest you." "Like what?" "May I sit?" Caleb nodded slowly. She pulled out a chair and sat with her back to the wall, positioning herself so she could see both doors, a warrior's habit. Sarah and Thomas moved closer, drawn to her like metal to a lodestone. Even Ruth appeared in the doorway, clutching her rag doll. Ayanna looked at each child in turn, really looked at them, not with pity, with recognition, as if she saw herself in their faces. "Your mama loved you very much." She said it to Sarah first. "She wrote about you in her journal, about how smart you are, how you notice everything." Sarah's face crumpled. "You read Mama's journal?" "Yes, without permission. I apologize. But I needed to understand what happened here." "That was private." "It was, and now it's evidence. Your mama knew something was wrong. She documented it. She left clues. And those clues are going to help us find who killed her." The word hung in the air. Killed, not died. not succumbed to fever. Killed.
As if Eleanor's death had been a deliberate act of violence rather than cruel fate. Caleb sank into a chair. His legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "You're saying someone murdered my wife?" "I'm saying your wife and 5 other women died of the same symptoms in the same house in 6 months. I'm saying those symptoms match a specific type of poisoning that Apache healers know well. I'm saying this land was a burial ground before you built on it, and someone has been using that fact to hide murder behind superstition." "That's impossible." "Is it? When did you build this house?" 6 years ago. We'd been ranching for 4 years before that, living in a smaller cabin.
But Eleanor was pregnant with Ruth, and we needed more space, so we built this place. "And did you find anything unusual when you dug the foundation?" Caleb's stomach turned cold. He remembered. Of course he remembered. The workers had found bones, human bones, and jewelry, and pottery shards. Eleanor had wanted to stop construction, had wanted to contact the territorial government, have them send someone to properly excavate and catalog what they'd found. But Caleb had been impatient. They'd already broken ground, already invested money they didn't have in lumber and nails. So he'd told the workers to gather everything, box it up, and he'd deal with it later. Later had never come. The boxes had sat in the barn for a month, then disappeared. Caleb had assumed one of the workers had taken them. Had been relieved, honestly, not to have to figure out what to do with dead people's belongings. "We found some things," he said quietly. "Old things. We moved them. You desecrated a burial site, and then you built your home on top of it." Ayanna said it without judgment, just fact. "The Blackfoot woman who does your washing was right. This land is angry, but not in the way she thinks. The spirits aren't killing your housekeepers. A person is. Someone who knows that blaming angry spirits will stop people from asking questions." Sarah had gone pale. "Who?" "That's what I'm here to find out, but I need your father's permission to stay, to investigate properly, and I need you to help me." She looked at Caleb, those black eyes holding his. This woman was asking him to trust her, to let an Apache woman live in his house, to work alongside her to uncover a murder conspiracy that sounded like madness. Every instinct he had screamed this was wrong, dangerous, foolish. But 6 women were dead. His children were fading like ghosts, and this stranger had walked into his cursed house without fear and lit a fire in a dead hearth and spoke about his wife's murder like it was a puzzle she intended to solve. "If you're wrong," Caleb said slowly, "if this is some kind of trick or con, I'll have you arrested. I'll testify against you myself. If I'm wrong, I'll turn myself in. But I'm not wrong. What do you want in return? Pay? Shelter. Food. Protection from the marshal who would arrest me on sight for being Apache in the wrong place. And when this is done, a letter of reference that says I worked here and I'm trustworthy. That's all." "That's all? You're risking your life for a letter?" Something flickered in her eyes. Pain, old and deep. "Martha was the only family I had. She saved my life. She loved me when no one else would. Finding who killed her isn't a transaction. It's a debt. The letter is just so I can keep moving afterward. Keep surviving." Caleb looked at his children. Sarah stood straighter than she had in weeks, as if this woman's presence had given her permission to hope. Thomas had set down his drawings and was simply watching, calm for the first time since Eleanor's death. Ruth had taken a step into the room, her doll dangling forgotten. "Rules," Caleb said. "You don't leave the property without me knowing. You don't bring any trouble here, and you don't do anything that might endanger the children." "Agreed." "And no," he paused, trying to find the right words, "no Indian rituals or ceremonies or whatever. I've got enough problems without the neighbors thinking I'm harboring some kind of medicine woman." Ayana's expression didn't change, but something sharp entered her voice. "I won't hide who I am, but I won't advertise it either. Fair enough?" "Fair enough." She stood, extended her hand. Caleb stared at it for a long moment before shaking. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused. A worker's hand, a survivor's hand. "I'll need to see your wife's journal," Ayana said, "and the medical reports if you have them. And I'll need to look at the graves." "Why the graves?" "Because if I'm right about the poison, there will be traces in the soil, in the plants growing around the burial sites. Nature tells the truth, even when people lie." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at the children. "I'm not here to replace your mama. No one can do that. But I'm here to make sure whoever took her from you pays for it. That's a promise." Sarah spoke in Apache, just 2 words. Ayana responded in the same language. Then Sarah translated for Caleb. "I said thank you. She said, warriors don't need thanks. They need purpose. She says, we're her purpose now." After Ayana left to examine the graves, Caleb sank into Eleanor's rocking chair and put his head in his hands. What had he just done? Let a stranger into his house. An Apache stranger who claimed his wife had been murdered, who spoke of poison and burial grounds and debts of honor. Eleanor would have liked her. The thought came unbidden but certain. Eleanor had always been curious about the native peoples, had learned what she could of their medicine and customs, had treated them with a respect most settlers lacked. She'd been the one who'd wanted to honor the burial ground properly, who'd argued they should choose a different site for the house. Caleb had overruled her, had prioritized speed and cost over his wife's concerns. And now Eleanor was dead, and 6 other women with her, and an Apache woman, sat in her rocking chair, speaking of murder as if it were a mathematics problem to be solved. The first full day with Ayana was strange in ways Caleb couldn't articulate. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, cleaning without being asked, cooking meals from whatever she found in the root cellar and pantry. The food was different from what Eleanor had made, simpler, more focused on the ingredients themselves rather than elaborate preparation. But it was good, and the children ate. That alone felt like a miracle. Ruth finished an entire bowl of venison stew. Thomas asked for seconds. Sarah ate slowly but steadily, her eyes never leaving Ayana's face, as if trying to memorize this woman who'd walked into their dying house and refused to leave. Ayana didn't talk much. She worked with her hands and watched with her eyes and listened with an intensity that made Caleb nervous. Several times he caught her standing motionless, head tilted, as if hearing something beyond normal range of sound. In the afternoon, she asked to see Eleanor's journal. Caleb hesitated, then retrieved it from the bedroom, where he'd kept it locked in a drawer. He couldn't read it himself. Had tried once, 2 weeks after the funeral, and made it through 3 pages before the pain became unbearable. Ayana took the leather-bound book and settled by the window. She read in silence for 2 hours while the children played quietly nearby. Not the wild play of normal children. Careful, contained play that wouldn't disturb the adults, that wouldn't risk anything. When Ayana finally looked up, her expression was grim. "Your wife was brilliant. She documented everything, every visit from neighbors, every meal, every change in her health and the health of the housekeepers. She didn't know she was creating evidence, but she was. Evidence of what? May I read you something? Caleb nodded, though his throat had gone tight.
Ayana's voice shifted as she read, becoming softer, taking on some echo of Eleanor's cadence.
September 23rd. Jonah Reed came by again today, third time this month. He brought gifts, as usual. A bottle of wine, some cured venison, honey from his hives. He's generous, but there's something in his eyes I don't trust. He asks too many questions about the native woman I treated last spring. Wants to know what herbs she used, what plants grow in this valley that have medicinal properties, what might be dangerous if misused. I've stopped answering. I tell him I don't remember. But I see him watching the woods, studying the plants. I think he's looking for something specific.
Ayana looked up. Jonah Reed. Tell me about him. Caleb's hands had clenched into fists without his noticing. He owns the ranch, 3 miles west. Widower, like me. His wife died 2 years back. Same fever, or so everyone thought. Caleb paused, trying to find words for the unease he'd always felt around Reed, but never acknowledged. He's helpful, brings gifts, offers advice, checks in on us regular. After Eleanor died, he was the first one here with food and condolences. But you don't like him. I don't not like him. He's a good neighbor. You're lying. To me or to yourself, I'm not sure which. Caleb started to protest, then stopped. She was right. He'd never liked Reed, never trusted the man's too perfect manners and too frequent visits. Reed had courted Eleanor before Caleb had proposed twice and been rejected twice. Then had married someone else within 6 months, as if Eleanor had been easily replaced. His wife had died of fever. Reed had mourned appropriately and moved on, had become the helpful neighbor who brought gifts and asked questions about native medicine, and appeared at their door at least once a week with some excuse about borrowed tools or shared fence lines. Eleanor wrote about him a lot, Ayana said, returning to the journal. Always the same pattern. He brings gifts, he asks questions about plants and poisons and native remedies. He's particularly interested in anything that could cause illness that might be mistaken for natural fever. The implication hit Caleb like a physical blow. You think Reed is poisoning people? I think Reed is experimenting. I think he killed his own wife 2 years ago and got away with it because no one questions fever. I think he's been perfecting his method, testing on women who won't be missed or investigated too carefully. Housekeepers, servants, people whose deaths are sad but not shocking. But why? What's the point? Control, power, the ability to kill without consequence. Ayana set the journal down carefully. There's a type of man who needs to prove he's stronger than death itself. Reed is that type, and he's been using your house as his laboratory. That's insane. Is it? Tell me about the gifts he brought, the food and drink. Caleb thought back. Reed had brought something almost every visit: wine and honey and preserved meats and fresh bread from Clarkston. Always generous, always thoughtful. Eleanor had sometimes joked that Reed was trying to court the whole family since he couldn't court her. And she'd always shared whatever he brought. With the housekeepers, with the children, with everyone in the household. Oh God. The words came out strangled. Eleanor used to give the housekeepers first choice of anything special. Said they worked hard and deserved treats. If Reed brought honey, she'd make sure the current housekeeper got the first jar. And how long after eating Reed's gifts did the housekeepers typically fall ill? A few days, maybe a week. Caleb's stomach was churning now. I never made the connection. He didn't want you to. That's why he used slow-acting poison.
something that mimics natural illness, something that gives him time to be far away when the symptoms start, and something that plays into existing superstitions about cursed land and angry spirits. Ayana stood and moved to the window.
Outside, dusk was falling. The graves on the hill were visible as dark shapes against snow. There's a fungus that grows in certain conditions. Apache healers know it well. It causes fever, weakness, confusion. Takes a week or two to kill if the dose is right. And it grows on food if conditions are right. Honey is perfect for it. Wine, preserved meat, anything stored in dark, damp conditions. How would Reed know about Apache poison? Your wife wrote that she treated a native woman last spring. I'll wager that woman was Chiricahua. I'll wager she was brought in sick from somewhere nearby. And I'll wager Reed was watching very carefully when your wife used native medicine to treat her.
Sarah had been listening from the doorway. Now she stepped forward. Uncle Jonah asked me about the sick lady. He wanted to know what plants Mama used. I told him because he seemed nice. Ayana knelt down to Sarah's level. You didn't do anything wrong. Reed is smart. He knows how to ask questions that seem innocent. But you've just given me very important information. Thank you. Are you going to catch him? We're going to catch him. All of us together. That night, after the children were in bed, Caleb and Ayana sat in the kitchen and planned. It was strange, sitting across from this woman he'd known less than a day, plotting to expose a murderer. But it also felt right in a way he couldn't explain, as if some pattern was finally revealing itself after months of chaos. We need proof, Ayana said. The journal helps, but it's not enough. We need to test the soil around the graves, need to examine Reed's property without him knowing, need to figure out where he's growing the fungus, because he has to be growing it. It doesn't occur naturally here. That's impossible. His ranch is 3 miles away. I can't just wander onto his land. You can't, but I can. If you're caught, I won't be caught. I've been invisible my whole life. One more disappearing act won't matter. She said it casually, but Caleb heard the pain underneath. This woman had spent her entire existence being overlooked, dismissed, erased. And now she was using that erasure as a weapon. When? He asked. Tomorrow night, while Reed is in Clarkston. He goes every Saturday for supplies. I've been watching. He's gone from noon until dusk. That gives me time. What do you need from me? Keep the children safe. If Reed suspects we're investigating, he might act. Might try to silence us the same way he silenced your wife. So you need to behave normally. Be the grieving widower. Accept his condolences and his gifts. Don't let him know anything has changed. I'm not a good liar. You don't have to lie. Just don't volunteer truth. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a moment. The house creaked around them, settling into night. Outside, wind howled through the valley, carrying that strange quality of voices that weren't there. Why are you really doing this? Caleb asked quietly. And don't tell me it's just about Martha. There's something else. Ayana was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was distant. I was 12 years old when the soldiers came. They said we'd attacked a wagon train. We hadn't, but they came anyway. Burned everything. Killed everyone. My mother, my father, my 2 brothers. I hid in a root cellar, covered in my family's blood, and listened to them die. Caleb couldn't find words. Martha found me 3 days later, half dead from cold and shock. She took me home, fed me, clothed me, tried to teach me to be white, to forget where I came from, to assimilate. And I let her, because I had nowhere else to go, no one else to be. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. I spent 12 years being sorry, being grateful for scraps, being quiet and obedient, and trying to earn the right to exist. But then Martha died, and I realized something. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead, doesn't punish the guilty, doesn't stop it from happening again. She looked at him directly.
Reed killed my family just as surely as those soldiers killed my blood family. Maybe he didn't pull a trigger, but he took away the one person who loved me. And I'm done being sorry about it. I'm done being invisible. I'm going to find proof, and I'm going to watch him hang, and I'm going to sleep soundly afterward, because justice is the only thing that lets you rest. The intensity in her voice made Caleb shiver. This woman was dangerous. Not to him, not to his children, but to anyone who stood between her and the truth she was hunting. What if we can't prove it? He asked. What if Reed is too careful? Then I'll kill him myself. She said it so matter-of-factly that it took a moment to register. Then, you can't. Watch me. I've already lost everything that matters. I've got nothing left to lose except time. And I'm not wasting any more of it watching guilty men walk free while good women die. Caleb should have been horrified, should have thrown her out right then. But he wasn't, because some dark part of him agreed, some part that had buried his wife and watched his children fade and stood helpless while death circled his house like a vulture. Let's get proof first, he said finally. Then we'll decide what justice looks like. Ayanna nodded, but her eyes said she'd already decided, and Caleb suspected nothing he said would change her mind. The next morning, Caleb woke to find Ayanna already gone. She'd left before dawn, Sarah said, had told the girl she was checking something and would be back by breakfast. Sarah didn't seem worried. She'd started following Ayanna around like a shadow, absorbing everything the woman said and did. Thomas was drawing again, but the images had changed. Now he drew a woman with long black braids, standing between the children, and a dark figure. Protection rather than threat. The boy's nightmares had eased. He'd slept through the previous night for the first time in weeks. Ruth had climbed into Ayanna's empty chair at breakfast and refused to move. Just sat there, waiting, as if she knew the woman would return and wanted to be ready. They were attaching already. Caleb could see it happening. His children were bonding with this stranger who'd walked into their lives claiming murder and conspiracy. Part of him wanted to stop it, to protect them from another loss when Ayanna inevitably left. But another part was grateful, because for the first time since Eleanor's death, his children were showing signs of life. Ayanna returned mid-morning with dirt under her nails and exhaustion in her eyes. She went straight to the kitchen, washed her hands, and then sat down heavily. "I found it," she said. Caleb's heart stuttered. "Found what?" "The fungus, growing in Reed's root cellar. He's got an entire section dedicated to it, hidden behind false walls, temperature and moisture controlled. It's sophisticated, professional. He's been doing this for years." "Did anyone see you?" "No, I told you. I'm invisible." "But now we have proof?" "We have knowledge. Proof requires witnesses, evidence that can be presented in court, and that's going to be harder." She pulled something from her pocket, a small cloth bundle. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing dark, twisted fragments that looked like rotten wood. "This is from Reed's cellar. It's the same fungus that would cause the symptoms Eleanor and the others showed. But I need to test it to be certain. Need to see if it reacts the way I think it will." "How do you test poison?" Ayanna's expression went grim. "Carefully." Over the next week,
A routine established itself. Ayanna worked during the day, cleaning and cooking and caring for the children as if she'd always been part of the household. But at night, after everyone else slept, she conducted her tests. She had a small laboratory set up in the barn, hidden behind hay bales.
She'd explained to Caleb that she couldn't risk the children accidentally encountering anything dangerous. She tested the fungus on plants first, watched how it killed them, documented the progression of decay. Then she tested soil samples from around the graves, comparing them to control samples from elsewhere on the property. The differences were stark. The grave sites showed concentrations of fungal spores that shouldn't naturally occur. He didn't just poison them, Ayanna explained one night as they reviewed her findings. He scattered spores around the graves afterward, to make the curse story more believable, to ensure the land itself seemed tainted. That's elaborate. Well, that's careful. Reed isn't some impulsive killer. He's methodical, patient. He plans everything, which means catching him requires being more careful than he is. 2 weeks after Ayanna arrived, Reed came to visit. Caleb saw him riding up the drive, and his stomach clenched. But Ayanna's expression remained neutral. She simply nodded and disappeared into the back of the house. Reed knocked cheerfully. When Caleb opened the door, the man's smile was warm and concerned. "Caleb, good to see you. Thought I'd check in, see how you're managing." "We're managing. I brought some things, honey from my hives, some cured venison, and bread from the bakery in Clarkston. That Swedish woman makes the best bread in the territory." He held out a basket. Inside, carefully wrapped, were the items he'd mentioned. Gifts that looked generous and innocent, and had probably killed Eleanor and 6 other women. Caleb forced himself to smile, to accept the basket, to invite Reed inside for coffee. They sat in the kitchen, making small talk about weather and livestock and territorial politics. All the while, Caleb wondered if Ayanna was listening, if she was documenting this visit the way Eleanor had documented all the others. Reed glanced around the kitchen. "House looks better. You managing the cleaning yourself?" "Hired someone new, local woman who needed work." "Anyone I know?" "Don't think so. Keeps to herself mostly." Reed's eyes sharpened slightly. "Well, that's good. You need help. Those children need stability." "Speaking of children, how are yours doing?" "Mine? I don't have any children, Caleb." "Right. Sorry. I must be thinking of someone else." Reed stood to leave after half an hour. As he reached the door, he paused. "You know, if you ever decide this place is too much, too many bad memories, I'd be interested in buying. Give you fair price. Let you start fresh somewhere else." There it was. The real reason for the visit. Not concern. Acquisition. Reed wanted the land, had probably wanted it for years, and had been willing to kill to get it. "I appreciate the offer," Caleb said carefully. "But this is home. Eleanor and I built it together. I'm not ready to let it go." "Of course. Just keep it in mind. The offer stands." After Reed left, Ayanna emerged from hiding. Her face was like stone. "He wants the land," she said. "Why, though? What's special about this property?" "Water rights. Your well never goes dry, even in drought years. Reed's does. Everyone's does. But not yours. This land sits over an underground river. Control this property, and you control water access for the whole valley." "How do you know that?" "Your wife wrote about it." Reed asked her about the well multiple times. Asked if she'd noticed anything unusual about the water quality or quantity. She thought he was just making conversation, but he was gathering information. Caleb sank into a chair.
The scope of Reed's planning was staggering. The man had been circling for years, watching, waiting, looking for the right moment and the right method. "We need to move faster," Ayanna said. "Now that he knows you hired someone new, he'll be suspicious. Might accelerate his plans. Might try to eliminate threats before we can expose him." "What do we do?" "We need something undeniable. Something that can't be explained away or dismissed. And I think I know where to find it." She pulled out a piece of paper, Martha's last letter, the one that had brought Ayanna to Montana in the first place. Martha wrote that she found something, evidence. She said she'd hidden it somewhere Reed would never think to look, somewhere connected to Eleanor. I think she hid proof in plain sight. We just need to figure out where. They searched the house, top to bottom, went through Eleanor's belongings, her clothes and jewelry and books, but found nothing that seemed like evidence, nothing that screamed murder conspiracy. It was Thomas who solved it. The boy had been watching them search, growing increasingly agitated. Finally, he tugged on Ayanna's sleeve and pointed to his drawings. She knelt down. "What is it, Thomas?" He flipped through his sketchbook to a particular page, a drawing of the graves on the hill. But in this version, one grave had flowers growing all around it. Not real flowers, symbolic ones, drawn with unusual detail and care. "Which grave?" Ayanna asked gently. Thomas pointed to the 6th grave, Martha's grave. They went to the hill at dusk. The graves were arranged in a neat row, each marked with a simple wooden cross. Martha's was the newest, the wood still pale and unseasoned. Ayanna knelt beside it, studied the ground, then began carefully digging around the base of the cross. Caleb watched, his heart hammering. This felt like desecration, like violating something sacred. But if Martha had hidden evidence here, they needed to find it. Ayanna's fingers found something. A small metal box, wrapped in oilcloth and buried 6 inches down. She lifted it carefully, and they returned to the house. Inside the kitchen, with the children watching, Ayanna opened the box. Inside were 3 things: a journal in Martha's handwriting, a collection of letters tied with string, and a small glass vial containing dark fragments that looked identical to the fungus Ayanna had found in Reed's cellar. Martha's journal was brief, only a dozen pages, but those pages contained meticulous documentation. Dates and times of Reed's visits, descriptions of the gifts he'd brought, notes about which housekeepers had eaten which items and when they'd fallen ill. And at the end, a confession. "I'm afraid I'm next. I've been too curious, asked too many questions. Reed knows I suspect. He brought honey 3 days ago, and I've been feeling unwell ever since. If you're reading this, Ayanna, it means I was right. And it means you need to stop him before he kills anyone else. The letters are from Reed's wife. I found them in the Clarkston church records. She was writing to her sister in Denver, describing her symptoms, describing her husband's strange behavior. She knew, and she died anyway. Don't let that happen to you. Don't let it happen to Eleanor's family. Be smart, be careful, and make him pay." The letters from Reed's wife were damning. In them, she described her husband's obsession with medicine and poison, his experiments with plants and fungi, his cold satisfaction when animals died after eating things he'd prepared. "I think Jonah is trying to kill me," one letter read. "I know how that sounds, but I'm so sick and the doctors can find nothing wrong, and my husband watches me with this strange expression, like he's waiting for something. I've stopped eating anything he gives me directly, but I'm still getting worse. I don't know what to do. If something happens to me, Please tell the marshal. Please make someone investigate. Don't let him get away with this." But no one had investigated. She'd died, been buried, been mourned, and Reed had moved on to his next target. Ayanna set the letters down carefully. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. Caleb had never seen her cry before. "We have him," she said. "This is enough. The journal, the letters, the physical evidence. It's enough. We take it to the marshal?" "No. We take it to Judge Morrison. He's in Clarkston tomorrow for circuit court. We present everything at once, in public, where Reed can't make it disappear." Caleb nodded. Then, "Thank you for coming here, for believing Martha, for—" his voice cracked, "for giving us a chance at justice." Ayanna reached across the table, took his hand. Her grip was warm and firm. "Thank you for letting me stay, for trusting me. I know what that cost you." Sarah spoke from the doorway. She'd been listening to everything. "Are you going to leave after we catch him?" The question hung in the air. Ayanna looked at the girl, at Thomas and Ruth, who'd crept closer, at Caleb, who was watching her with something complicated in his eyes. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That depends on a lot of things." "We want you to stay," Sarah said. "All of us. You're—" She struggled for words in English, then switched to Apache, then back. "You're part of the family now. Even if you're not Mama, you're something else. Something we need." Ayanna's composure finally broke. She stood and crossed to Sarah, pulled the girl into an embrace. Then Thomas and Ruth joined them, a tangle of arms and tears and promises that might not be kept, but needed to be made anyway. Caleb watched this strange tableau. His children and this Apache woman who'd walked into their cursed house and refused to believe in curses, who'd hunted a killer while teaching his daughter to fight and his son to speak, and his youngest to trust again. Whatever happened next, with Reed and the marshal and the judge, this moment was real. This connection was real. And Caleb Hart, practical man who believed in ledgers and fence posts, found himself believing in something more. Something that couldn't be quantified or measured, but was no less true for its intangibility. Family, he realized, wasn't about blood. It was about choice. About who you stood beside when everything was falling apart. About who stayed when leaving would be easier. And this woman, this fierce, broken, beautiful woman, had chosen to stay. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his bedroom, looking out at the graves on the hill. 6 women buried there. 6 deaths that could have been prevented if someone had asked the right questions sooner. But now they had answers. Now they had evidence. Tomorrow they would ride to Clarkston. Tomorrow they would face Reed and the law and whatever came next. Tomorrow, justice might finally be served. But tonight, for the first time since Eleanor died, the house felt like home again. Not because the grief was gone, but because they weren't facing it alone anymore. Ayanna appeared beside him, silent as always. She'd taken to these nighttime vigils too, neither of them sleeping well, both haunted by ghosts that demanded acknowledgement. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified." "You?" "Always. But fear is just proof you're still alive, still fighting." They stood together in the darkness, watching night deepen over the Montana wilderness. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and risk and the possibility of more loss. But tonight, they had this quiet moment of solidarity between 2 people who'd been broken in different ways, but were finding strength in their shared purpose. "Whatever happens," Caleb said, "thank you for seeing what I couldn't, for believing Martha, for saving my family. You saved yourselves. I just helped you remember how." It wasn't true, but Caleb didn't argue. Some gifts were too large for thank you. Some debts could never be repaid.
You just carried them forward and tried to be worthy of the second chance you'd been given. Outside, the wind had died down. The voices it carried were silent. And for the first time in 6 months, the Montana night felt peaceful rather than threatening. The dead were still dead. The past couldn't be undone. But the future, perhaps, could be reclaimed. And tomorrow, they would begin. The ride to Clarkston took 3 hours through snow that had started falling before dawn. Caleb drove the wagon with Ayanna beside him, both wrapped in heavy coats against the cold. The children stayed behind with Mrs. Chen, the shopkeeper's wife, who'd agreed to watch them despite the whispers that already followed the Hart family like smoke. Ayanna had insisted on coming. Not hidden in the back like cargo, but sitting beside Caleb where anyone could see. It was a calculated risk. An Apache woman traveling openly with a white rancher would draw attention. But that was the point. Let people look. Let them talk. By the time Reed realized what was happening, it would be too late. The town appeared through the snow like a ghost of itself. Clarkston was dying the way all frontier towns died, slowly and without dignity. Half the buildings stood empty. The hotel had closed last summer. Even the saloon looked ready to surrender. Only the courthouse remained vital, a squat stone building that housed both law and hope in equal, insufficient measure. Judge Morrison's circuit brought him through once a month. Today was his last day before moving on to Helena. If they missed him now, it would be 4 weeks before they had another chance. 4 weeks for Reed to cover his tracks. 4 weeks for more people to die. Caleb tied the horses outside the courthouse. A few townspeople watched from doorways and windows. Their eyes lingered on Ayanna, calculating, judging. She kept her head high and her expression neutral, but Caleb saw the tension in her shoulders. Every moment in public was an act of courage for her. Every stare was a reminder that she existed at the mercy of people who didn't believe she had the right to exist at all. Inside, the courthouse smelled of wood smoke and old paper. A clerk sat at a desk near the entrance, scratching notes in a ledger. He looked up as they entered, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Ayanna. "Help you? We need to see Judge Morrison. It's urgent." "The judge is hearing a property dispute right now. You'll have to wait." "How long?" "Hour, maybe. Could be longer." Caleb nodded and moved toward the benches along the wall. Ayanna followed, her movements careful and deliberate. They sat in silence, the metal box containing Martha's evidence resting between them like a bomb waiting to detonate. The door to the courtroom opened, and voices spilled out. Caleb recognized several ranchers from the valley, all arguing about fence lines and water access. The kind of disputes that defined frontier life. Small conflicts that seemed enormous until you had real problems to compare them against. "Caleb Hart?" He turned. Marshal Dawson stood in the doorway, his expression curious and wary in equal measure. Dawson was a fair man as marshals went, but he was also a man of his time and place. He enforced the law as written, which meant the law protected some people more than others. "Marshal, didn't expect to see you in town. Everything all right out at your place?" "That depends on your definition of all right." Dawson's eyes shifted to Ayanna. His expression hardened slightly. "Who's this?" "Ayanna. She works for me." "Apache?" "Yes."
You know the rules about Indians in town. They need passes, documentation. Can't just wander around freely. Caleb felt Ayanna tense beside him, but her voice remained steady. I'm not wandering. I'm here with Mr. Hart on legitimate business. What kind of business? The kind that requires Judge Morrison's attention. Dawson studied them both, clearly trying to decide if this situation required his intervention. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, but I'll be watching. Any trouble and she's in a cell, understood? There won't be trouble. The marshal moved off, but his threat hung in the air like smoke. Ayanna exhaled slowly. That went better than expected, she murmured. He threatened to arrest you. He didn't actually arrest me. In my experience, that counts as a good interaction. The bitterness in her voice cut through Caleb. This was her life, constant threat, constant negotiation, the perpetual need to prove she had a right to occupy space that others took for granted. Another hour passed. Then another. Caleb watched townspeople come and go, each one stealing glances at them. Whispers followed in their wake. By afternoon, half of Clarkston would know that Caleb Hart had brought an Indian woman to town. By evening, speculation would have twisted the story into something unrecognizable. Finally, the courtroom doors opened, and Judge Morrison emerged. He was a heavy man in his late 50s, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice. He carried himself with the exhausted authority of someone who knew the law was imperfect, but still believed it was better than nothing. Mr. Hart, my clerk said you needed to speak with me urgently. Yes, Your Honor. It's about my wife's death, and the deaths of 5 other women. Morrison's expression shifted from weary to alert. That's a serious claim. You'd better come into my chambers. They followed him into a small office behind the courtroom. Morrison settled behind a desk stacked with papers and case files. He gestured for them to sit. Now then, tell me what this is about. Caleb glanced at Ayanna. She gave a slight nod. He took a breath and began. 6 women have died at my ranch in the past 6 months. All of them showed the same symptoms: fever, weakness, confusion. The doctor called it mountain fever and said it was just bad luck. But it wasn't bad luck. It was murder. Morrison's eyebrows rose. That's a significant accusation. Do you have evidence? Ayanna set the metal box on the desk. Martha Whitfield was the 6th woman to die. Before she died, she documented her suspicions. She collected evidence, and she left instructions for me to find it if anything happened to her. And who are you? Martha's adopted daughter. She raised me after soldiers killed my family. When she wrote that she was in danger, I came. But I arrived too late to save her. Now I'm here to make sure her death means something. Morrison opened the box carefully. His expression remained neutral as he examined the contents, but Caleb saw his jaw tighten as he read Martha's journal entries. When he reached the letters from Reed's wife, he went very still. These letters, how did you obtain them? Martha found them in the church records. Reed's wife had written to her sister in Denver. The sister donated the correspondence to the church after the wife died, hoping someone might investigate. No one did. Morrison read in silence for several minutes. When he looked up, his expression was grim. This is damning material, if authentic, but it's also circumstantial. A good lawyer could argue coincidence, could claim these letters show nothing more than a worried woman imagining threats that didn't exist. There's physical evidence too, Ayanna said. She explained about the fungus, about the samples she'd taken from Reed's property and from the grave sites, about the chemical analysis she'd conducted using methods learned from Apache healers. Morrison listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You're telling me that Jonah Reed, one of the most successful ranchers in the territory, has been systematically poisoning women for years, that he killed his own wife and then used Mr. Hart's property as a testing ground for perfecting his methods?" "Yes."
Why? For the land, for the water rights, and because he could.
Ayana's voice was flat. "Some men kill for profit. Some kill for power. Reed kills for both. You understand what you're asking me to do? If I pursue this, it will tear this community apart. Reed has friends, influence, people who've known him for years who will refuse to believe he's capable of this." "I understand," Caleb said, "but 6 women are dead. My wife is dead. And if we don't stop him, he'll kill again." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. "I'll need to examine the evidence more thoroughly. I'll need to interview witnesses,
And I'll need to confront Reed directly. But I warn you, this process will be ugly. Your name will be dragged through speculation. People will question your judgment for hiring Miss Ayana. They'll question her motives. They'll question everything." "Let them question," Ayana said. "Questions lead to truth, and truth is what we're after." Morrison turned to face them. "All right, give me 2 days to review everything and prepare a proper investigation. In the meantime, both of you need to stay out of Reed's way. Don't confront him. Don't give him any reason to suspect we're looking into this. Can you do that?" "Yes, Your Honor."
"Miss Ayana, I'll need you to remain available for questioning, which means staying in town where I can find you. The hotel is closed, but Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house. I'll arrange lodging. I need to return to the ranch. The children will be safer if you're not there. If Reed suspects you're building a case against him, he might act, might try to eliminate witnesses. Better if you're somewhere public, somewhere he can't reach you without being seen." It made sense, but Caleb saw the conflict in Ayana's face. She'd promised the children she wouldn't leave. Now circumstances were forcing her to break that promise. "I'll explain to them," Caleb said quietly.
They'll understand. Will they? Or will they think I'm like all the others, here one day, gone the next? They'll trust you because I trust you, because you've earned it.
Morrison cleared his throat. "I'll have Marshal Dawson escort you to the boarding house. It's not ideal, but it's the best protection I can offer. And Miss Ayana, be careful. Dawson is a good lawman, but he's also a product of his environment. Don't give him any excuse to see you as a threat." After they left Morrison's chambers, Caleb and Ayana stood in the courthouse hallway. The reality of their situation was settling in. They'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. For better or worse, Reed would soon know they were coming for him. "I don't like this," Ayana said. "Separation makes us vulnerable." "I don't like it either. But Morrison is right. If Reed thinks we're together, planning something, he might act rashly. This way, he'll think we're just going about our normal business." "Nothing about this is normal business." "No, but we have to pretend it is." Marshal Dawson appeared with Mrs. Patterson, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked Ayana up and down without hostility, but without warmth either. "Judge says you need lodging. I've got a room in the back, small but clean, meals included, $1 a night." "I can pay," Ayana said. "Didn't say you couldn't, just telling you terms." Mrs. Patterson turned to Caleb. "Your friend here is going to cause talk, you know that. Indian woman staying in a white boarding house? People won't like it." "People don't have to like it. They just have to tolerate it." Tolerating and liking are two different things. But I run my house my way. Anyone has a problem, they can take it up with Judge Morrison. She looked at Ayanna again. You cause trouble, you're out. But you conduct yourself proper, you're welcome as anyone. Fair? Fair. Caleb wanted to protest the implied threat, but Ayanna touched his arm lightly, a gesture that said, let it go. This was as good as they were going to get. I'll check on you tomorrow, he said. Be careful going back. Storm's getting worse. They stood awkwardly, neither quite sure how to say goodbye. In the past 3 weeks, they'd become something like partners, something like friends, something that defied easy categorization, but felt essential nonetheless. Finally, Ayanna held out her hand. Caleb shook it, feeling the strength in her grip. Keep the children safe, she said. Keep yourself safe. I've been doing that my whole life. I'm good at it. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she mattered, that her presence had changed everything, that his family needed her in ways he was only beginning to understand. But Mrs. Patterson was waiting, and Marshall Dawson was watching, and the words wouldn't come. So he just nodded and turned away, heading back into the snow. The ride home was brutal. Wind had picked up, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Caleb hunched in the wagon seat, trusting the horses to find their way. His mind churned with everything that had happened, everything that was about to happen. He'd set wheels in motion that couldn't be stopped. If Morrison found sufficient cause to arrest Reed, the whole territory would erupt in speculation and accusation. Reed had friends in high places, business partners who depended on him, people who would fight to protect their investments. And at the center of it all would be Ayanna, an Apache woman accusing a white rancher of murder. No matter how solid the evidence, some people would never accept her word over his, would see her as the real threat, the outsider trying to destroy one of their own. Caleb should have felt fear, should have questioned his choices, but instead he felt a strange clarity. For the first time since Eleanor's death, he was doing something. Fighting back, instead of just enduring. And if that meant risk, so be it. Some things were worth risking everything for. The ranch appeared through the snow like salvation. Lights glowed in the windows, where Mrs. Chen must have lit lamps for the children. Smoke rose from the chimney, signs of life and warmth in a frozen world. He unhitched the horses and got them into the barn, then trudged to the house. The door opened before he reached it. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face anxious. "Where's Ayanna?" "She has to stay in town for a few days. The judge wants her available for questioning." "She's not coming back?" "She is, just not tonight. Not until Judge Morrison finishes investigating." Thomas appeared behind Sarah, his expression stricken. Ruth started crying, that quiet, desperate sound she made when she thought she was being abandoned again. Caleb knelt down and pulled them close. "She didn't want to leave. The judge made her stay, but she'll be back, I promise." "Everyone promises," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "And then they die, or they leave, and promises don't mean anything. This is different." "How? How is it different?" "Because Ayanna isn't like the others," Caleb wanted to say. "Because she's stronger and fiercer and more committed. Because she's hunting the man who killed your mother, and she won't stop until justice is done." But he couldn't say that, couldn't burden children with the knowledge of murder and conspiracy. So instead he said, "Because she gave me something to give you, proof that she's coming back." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle. Ayanna had pressed it into his hand just before they'd separated, when Mrs. Patterson wasn't looking. He hadn't examined it on the ride home, had just tucked it away for safekeeping. Now he unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a bracelet, turquoise and silver, the one Ayanna wore every day, the one that had belonged to her mother, her last connection to the family she'd lost. She said to tell you that warriors don't abandon their posts. They hold the line no matter what. And this, he held up the bracelet. This is her promise that she's holding the line, that she'll come back for it. For you. Sarah took the bracelet with shaking hands, studied it in the lamplight. Then she slipped it onto her own wrist, where it hung loose but secure. She's really coming back? She's really coming back. When? A few days, maybe a week. Depends on how long the investigation takes. What if Mr. Reed hurts her? What if he finds out she's the one who told about him? The judge won't let that happen, and Ayanna can take care of herself. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Reed was dangerous, clever. If he suspected what was happening, he might act before Morrison could move against him, might try to silence the threat while he still had the chance. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He walked through the house, checking locks and windows, making sure everything was secure. The children had finally settled, exhausted by emotion. Mrs. Chen had gone home with promises to return in the morning, and Caleb was alone with his thoughts and his fears. He found himself in the kitchen where Ayanna had sat that first morning, where she'd calmly announced that his wife had been murdered, and then proceeded to prove it. 3 weeks. That's all the time they'd had together. And yet, she'd become essential. Not just to the children, but to him. Eleanor would have understood, would have approved. His wife had believed in justice and truth and standing up to bullies. She would have liked Ayanna's fierce determination, would have respected her refusal to be invisible. Caleb pulled out Eleanor's journal and read the last entry, written 3 days before she died. Something is very wrong. I can feel it in my bones. Jonah Reed has been coming by more frequently, and there's something in his eyes that frightens me. He brought honey yesterday, and I watched him very carefully when he set it down. His hands were shaking, just slightly, as if he were nervous or excited about something. I didn't eat any of it. Told him I was fasting for religious reasons. He looked disappointed. Caleb, if you're reading this and I'm gone, please know I tried to be careful. Please know I fought to stay. And please, please look after our babies. They need you. They need stability and love, and someone who won't leave them. Find that person. Find someone strong enough to stand when I no longer can. Tears blurred the words. Eleanor had known. Maybe not consciously, but some part of her had understood she was in danger, had tried to protect herself, and it hadn't been enough. But now they had Ayanna. Now they had evidence. Now they had a chance to make Reed answer for what he'd done. Caleb closed the journal and made a silent promise to his dead wife. I'll finish this. I'll protect them. And I'll make sure the person who took you from us pays. Morning came gray and cold. Caleb fed the children and sent them to do chores while he rode the property line, checking fences and stock. Normal ranch work that felt absurd given everything else happening, but animals still needed tending. Life still demanded attention. He was mending a section of fence when he saw the rider approaching. For a moment his heart leapt, thinking maybe Ayanna had left town early. But as the figure got closer, he recognized Reed's distinctive bay horse. His stomach dropped. This was it, the confrontation he'd been dreading. Reed pulled up and dismounted with easy grace. His smile was friendly, his manner relaxed. Nothing in his demeanor suggested he knew what was coming. "Caleb, good to see you out working. Property looks better lately." "Thanks." Heard you were in town yesterday. Everything all right? Just business. Nothing important. Brought that Indian woman with you, I heard. People are talking. Caleb kept his expression neutral. Let them talk. She works for me.
Had business in town. That's all there is to it.
Sure. Just watching out for you, friend. Woman like that draws attention. Not the good kind. Folks might get the wrong idea about your household. What idea would that be? Reed shrugged. Just that you're not thinking clearly. That grief has clouded your judgment. I mean, hiring an Apache? After everything that happened with the housekeepers? Seems like asking for trouble. She's been no trouble at all. Yet. But these people, Caleb, they're not like us. They don't think like us. Don't value the same things. You trust her, and one day you'll wake up and find she's robbed you blind. Or worse. Caleb forced himself to stay calm, to remember Morrison's warning about not confronting Reed prematurely. I appreciate your concern, but I'm managing fine. Are you? Because from where I stand, you're a man who's had 6 women die in his house in 6 months. That's not fine. That's cursed. And bringing another woman into that situation, especially one who probably knows Indian curses and black magic, that's dangerous. There it was. The implication that Ayanna herself might be the source of danger, planting seeds of doubt, trying to turn Caleb against her before the investigation could proceed. I don't believe in curses. Maybe you should. This land has a history, Caleb. Native burial grounds, blood spilled. Sometimes the dead don't rest easy. Funny, that's almost exactly what you said after Eleanor died. About the land being cursed. About how I should sell and move on before more tragedy struck. Reed's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes. Just concerned for you, friend. Are you? Or are you concerned about something else? Like maybe wanting this property for yourself. Now the smile faded. What are you implying? Nothing. Just noticing patterns. Wondering why you're so interested in my land. Why you keep suggesting I sell. Why you keep showing up with gifts and questions. I show up because I'm a good neighbor. I bring gifts because I'm a decent human being. And I ask questions because I care about you and your family. Reed's voice had gone cold. But if you'd rather I stay away, just say so. I've got plenty of other things to occupy my time. Maybe that's best, for now. Reed mounted his horse without another word. But before riding off, he looked down at Caleb with an expression that sent chills down his spine. Be careful, Caleb. This territory is dangerous for people who don't know when to mind their own business. Accidents happen, even to people who think they're safe. He rode away, leaving Caleb standing in the snow with his heart hammering. That had been a threat, veiled but unmistakable. Reed knew something was wrong, knew Caleb was moving against him, and he'd just made it clear he wouldn't go down without a fight. Caleb abandoned the fence work and rode hard back to the house. He found Sarah teaching Thomas and Ruth a game Ayanna had shown her, something with stones and patterns. The children looked up as he burst in. Get your warmest clothes. We're going into town. Why? Because I need you somewhere safe, all of you, right now. Sarah's eyes went wide. Mr. Reed came back, didn't he? How did you know? I've been watching from the upstairs window, like Ayanna taught me. She said warriors always watch their perimeter, always know who's coming. Smart girl. Eleanor's daughter. Yes, he came back, and I don't trust him not to come back again. So we're leaving. Mrs. Chen can watch the animals for a few days. We're staying in town until Judge Morrison finishes his investigation. They packed quickly, taking only essentials. Caleb hitched the wagon and loaded the children, his rifle, and enough supplies for a week. As they pulled away from the ranch, he looked back at the house. 6 graves on the hill, smoke rising from the chimney, a place that had been home and was now a crime scene. He prayed they'd be able to come back, that Morrison would move quickly enough to stop Reed before the man did something desperate. But prayer felt insufficient against a killer who'd already claimed 7 lives and showed no signs of stopping. The ride to Clarkston felt like fleeing rather than strategic retreat. But Caleb refused to second-guess himself. The children were what mattered, keeping them alive, keeping them safe. Everything else was secondary. They arrived as afternoon was fading toward evening. Caleb went straight to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. The woman answered his knock with surprise. "Mr. Hart, didn't expect to see you back so soon. I need rooms, for me and the children, several nights."
"Maybe a week?" "That's unusual." "Everything about this situation is unusual. Can you accommodate us?" Mrs. Patterson studied his face, reading the fear there. Then she nodded. "I can put the children in the room next to Miss Ayana's. You can have the one across the hall. But I'll need payment up front. $1 per room per night." Done. He paid her from the emergency cash he kept for trips to town, then carried the children's bags upstairs. Sarah went immediately to Ayana's door and knocked. The door opened, and Ayana stood there, surprise giving way to alarm as she saw them all. "What happened?" "Reed came to the ranch, threatened me, thinly veiled but unmistakable. I couldn't risk staying there with the children, so we're here." Ayana pulled them into her small room. It was barely large enough for a bed and washstand, but they crowded in anyway, safe, together. "Tell me exactly what he said." Caleb recounted the conversation. With each sentence, Ayana's expression grew darker. "He knows. Maybe not details, but he knows we're moving against him. Which means he'll be taking precautions, covering his tracks, maybe planning to run, or planning to eliminate threats," Caleb said quietly, aware of small ears listening. Ayana met his eyes. Understanding passed between them. This had just become more dangerous than either had anticipated. "We need to tell Morris." Finally, he sat back and rubbed his face. "All right, I've reviewed the evidence. It's circumstantial but compelling. Enough for a warrant, I think. But serving that warrant is going to be delicate. Reed has friends. They'll resist." "What if he runs?" Ayana asked. "I'll have Marshal Dawson watch his place tonight. If Reed tries to leave, we'll arrest him. But I need until morning to prepare proper legal documents, to do this right." "Morning might be too late." "It's the best I can do. Law requires process, Miss Ayana, even when process feels too slow." They returned to the boarding house as night settled over Clarkston. Mrs. Patterson had fed the children and put them to bed. Caleb looked in on them, found all 3 sleeping in one bed, tangled together for comfort and warmth. He closed the door softly and found Ayana waiting in the hallway. "They're scared," he said. "So am I." It was the first time she'd admitted fear, the first time her armor had cracked enough to show vulnerability. Caleb realized how much courage it took for her to say those words, to acknowledge weakness when weakness could be weaponized against her. "We'll get through this." "Will we? Or will Reed slip away, and we'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders?" "Morrison will move tomorrow. Dawson is watching tonight. We've done everything we can. Everything except what needs doing. Everything except ending this permanently." Her tone made him look at her sharply. "What are you thinking?" "That legal justice is slow and uncertain. That Reed has money for lawyers and influence with judges. That even if he's arrested, he might walk free.
And if he walks free, he'll come for us. For the children. He won't leave loose ends. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about protection. About doing what's necessary when the law proves insufficient. Ayanna, no. We can't. That makes us no better than him. Doesn't it? He killed for land and water, for profit and pleasure. I would kill to protect children, to stop a monster. Those things are not the same. She was right and wrong simultaneously. Caleb understood her logic, even agreed with parts of it. But crossing that line would destroy something essential, would turn them into the very thing they were fighting against. Promise me you won't do anything rash, that you'll let Morrison handle this legally. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. Then, I promise I'll try. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the only one she could give. They stood in the dim hallway, two people bound by grief and purpose, and something neither quite had words for yet. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. Tonight, they had this moment of uncertain peace. Get some rest, Caleb said finally. Tomorrow we end this, one way or another. One way or another, Ayanna agreed. But her eyes said she'd already decided which way she preferred, and Caleb wasn't sure he could stop her. Dawn came to Clarkston with the pale reluctance of a witness being called to testify. Caleb woke to find the boarding house already stirring, voices drifting up through floorboards that complained under every footstep. He dressed quickly and checked on the children. All three still slept, exhausted by fear and displacement. Good. Let them rest while they could. Ayanna's door stood open, her room empty. His stomach tightened. He took the stairs, two at a time, and found her in the kitchen with Mrs. Patterson, both women nursing coffee in the gray morning light. Couldn't sleep either? Mrs. Patterson asked, pouring him a cup without being asked. No, ma'am. Judge Morrison sent word an hour ago. He's preparing the warrant now. Marshal Dawson will serve it at Reed's Ranch this morning. You're both wanted at the courthouse by 8. Caleb checked his pocket watch. 7:15. 45 minutes until legal machinery ground into motion. 45 minutes for everything to go wrong. Did Dawson watch Reed's place all night like he said? Sent his deputy, boy named Tucker. Good kid, but green. Never done surveillance work before. Ayanna's expression darkened. So we have a young, inexperienced deputy watching a man who's killed at least 7 women. What could possibly go wrong? Morrison did the best he could with limited resources. The best he could might not be enough. Mrs. Patterson set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. You two need to understand something. This town, this territory, it runs on trust. People trust their neighbors, trust that good men don't do evil things. You're asking everyone to believe that Jonah Reed, who's lived here 15 years, who's donated to the church and helped build the school, is a calculating murderer. That's a hard sell. Truth isn't about selling, Ayanna said. It's about evidence. Evidence that can be interpreted different ways. Evidence that comes from a dead woman's letters and an Indian woman's word against a respected white rancher. Mrs. Patterson's voice wasn't unkind, but it was brutally honest. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying you're fighting an uphill battle, and you better be prepared for how ugly it's going to get. We're prepared. Are you? Because I've seen frontier justice. I've seen lynch mobs and railroaded trials, and innocent people hanged because someone needed someone to blame. And I've seen guilty people walk free because they had money and connections. You're gambling everything on a system that's broken at best and corrupt at worst. Caleb heard the warning underneath. This woman who'd opened her home to Ayanna despite the risk, who'd taken them in when trouble followed, was trying to prepare them for disappointment, for the possibility that Reed might escape justice, despite all their evidence. "What would you do," he asked, "if you were us?" Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'd make sure I had a backup plan, because hoping the law will work and knowing it will work are two very different things." At 7:45 they walked to the courthouse through streets that were beginning to fill with early risers. Word had spread somehow. It always did in small towns. People knew something was happening. Knew the judge had called for an early session. Knew it involved the Hart family and their Apache housekeeper, and whispers of murder. Shopkeepers stood in doorways. Women paused in their marketing. Children stopped their games to watch. Caleb felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. Some faces showed sympathy. Others showed suspicion or hostility. A few showed the bright, eager interest of people who lived for scandal and drama. Marshal Dawson waited on the courthouse steps. His expression was grim. "We have a problem." Caleb's heart dropped. "What kind of problem?" "Reed's gone. House is empty. Looks like he packed and left sometime during the night. Tucker swears nobody came or went, but the boy fell asleep around midnight. Could have been gone for hours by now." "You're telling me our only suspect fled and nobody stopped him?" "I'm telling you, Tucker is a kid who made a mistake. And yes, Reed is in the wind." Dawson's jaw was tight with frustration. "I've got men searching, but he could be anywhere. Montana territory is big and empty. Easy to disappear if you know what you're doing." Ayanna had gone very still beside Caleb. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "What about his property? Did you search it?" "Judge hasn't issued the warrant yet. Can't search without legal authority." "But you just said he's gone. That makes him a flight risk. That changes everything." "Maybe, but I still need that warrant before I start tearing through a citizen's home." "He's not a citizen anymore. He's a fugitive." "That's for Judge Morrison to decide, not me." They were wasting time arguing legal technicalities while Reed put distance between himself and justice. Caleb could see the same calculation playing across Ayanna's face. See her weighing options and consequences. Morrison emerged from the courthouse, looking like a man who'd aged a decade overnight. "I heard, and that's a failure I'll have to live with. But abandoning law entirely because it failed once? That's how we end up with mob justice and innocent people hanging from trees. So we do this right, even if right is slower than we'd like." The search of Reed's ranch took most of the morning. Caleb and Ayanna weren't allowed on the property. Instead, they waited in the courthouse with the children, who'd been brought over by Mrs. Patterson. The hours crawled past with excruciating slowness. Sarah sat with Ayanna's bracelet clutched in her hand, turning it over and over. Thomas drew picture after picture, his charcoal rendering the same scene repeatedly. A man on horseback, disappearing into distance. Ruth had gone silent again, retreating into that place where words couldn't reach her. Near noon, Dawson returned. His expression told the story before he spoke. "We found it, exactly where Miss Ayanna said it would be. Hidden chamber in the root cellar. Enough of that fungus to kill 100 people. And documentation. Reed kept records, dates, dosages, effects, like he was running scientific experiments." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "That's our evidence. That's enough for murder charges, multiple counts. I'll draft the formal indictment and get it to the territorial marshal by tonight." "How long until they catch him?" Caleb asked. "Depends. Days, if we're lucky. Weeks, more likely. Could be months if he's smart and has money cached somewhere." "Months?" Sarah's voice cracked. "We have to wait months, wondering if he's coming back? If he's going to hurt us?" "He won't come back," Dawson said. Man's running for his life now. Last thing he'll do is return to where people are looking for him. But Ayanna shook her head slowly. You don't know him like I do. You don't understand how men like Reed think. He's not just running. He's regrouping, planning, and he won't leave loose ends. We're loose ends. The children are loose ends. He'll come for us when he thinks we've relaxed, when we think we're safe.
Oh, that's paranoia talking. That's survival talking. I've spent my whole life around men who think other people are obstacles to be removed. Reed is that kind of man. He killed 7 women to perfect his method and protect his secret. You think he'll stop now, just because he's inconvenienced? The room went quiet. Even Morrison looked troubled by her logic. I can offer protection, Dawson said finally. Keep a deputy posted at the boarding house. Watch for suspicious activity. 1 deputy? Against a man who spent years planning murders? That's not protection. That's a target. It's all I can spare. I've got 2 deputies total and a territory to cover. I'm stretched thin as is. Ayanna stood abruptly. Then we protect ourselves. She walked out before anyone could respond. Caleb found her on the courthouse steps, staring at the mountains in the distance. Those peaks where someone could hide for years if they knew the country. Where a man like Reed could vanish and plot and wait for his moment. You're planning something, Caleb said. I'm planning to survive, to keep those children alive. By doing what? Hunting Reed yourself? If necessary. That's insane. You don't know where he went, don't know what resources he has. You'd be walking into an ambush. Maybe. Or maybe I'd be the ambush. Apache are good at that. It's how we survived 200 years of people trying to exterminate us. Caleb moved to stand beside her, lowered his voice. I understand wanting revenge. God knows I want it too. But this isn't the way. Then what is the way? Wait for months while he plans our deaths? Hope the law catches him before he catches us? Put faith in a system that's already failed us twice? I don't have a better answer. I just know that if you go after him and die trying, those children lose another person they've started to love. They've lost too many already. That landed. He saw it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way her hands clenched into fists. I promised them I'd come back. Then come back. Stay. Let the marshals handle Reed. And if he comes for us, we'll face him together. But don't go hunting him alone. That's suicide. Better me than them. It's not better. It's just different death. And death is death, regardless of who it takes. They stood in silence, watching the town move around them. Normal people doing normal things, shopping and gossiping, and living lives untroubled by murder and conspiracy. Caleb envied them their ignorance. I need to think, Ayanna said finally. I need time to figure out what comes next. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. But her expression said she wasn't sure that was true. That afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A group of ranchers from the valley, led by a man named Coleman, who owned property adjacent to Reed's. They found Caleb at the boarding house and asked to speak with him privately. Mrs. Patterson showed them to the parlor. 6 men, weathered and serious, who'd ridden 2 hours to deliver whatever message they carried. Coleman spoke for the group. We heard about Reed, about the charges, about the evidence. And we want you to know we believe you. We've been comparing notes. Turns out Reed made offers on most of our properties over the years. Always generous. Always with some good reason why we should sell. And always he seemed just a little too interested in who was sick and who was struggling.
Another rancher, Henderson, nodded. My wife had a difficult childbirth 3 years back. Reed came by near every day with food and asking how she was faring. I thought he was being neighborly. Now I wonder what he was really doing. You think he was trying to poison her too? I think he was looking for opportunity. My wife survived, and he stopped coming around. Like he'd lost interest once she wasn't vulnerable anymore. Coleman leaned forward. Point is, you're not alone in this. Reed fooled all of us, made us think he was something he wasn't. And now that the mask is off, we want to help. Want to make sure he faces justice. The marshal is already hunting him. One marshal for the whole territory? That's not enough. We're putting together a posse. Men who know this country, who can cover ground the law can't. We find Reed, we bring him in. Let the judge decide his fate. It was vigilante justice, dressed up in noble language. The kind of frontier solution that sounded good until innocent people got hurt. But Caleb also understood the impulse. These men felt betrayed, wanted to do something, wanted action instead of patience. I appreciate the offer, but Morrison won't sanction a private manhunt. He's particular about legal procedure. Morrison doesn't have to know until after we've brought Reed back. What matters is stopping him before he kills again. Or before he comes back for the people who exposed him, Henderson added. Reed knows you and that Indian woman built the case against him. He knows your children can testify. You're not safe until he's caught or dead. And I don't know about you, but I sleep better when threats are neutralized. Caleb wanted to refuse, wanted to insist on legal channels and proper process. But these men were offering protection, were acknowledging that the system had failed and proposing to fill the gap. How could he reject that? Let me talk to Judge Morrison, get his unofficial blessing at least. I won't be party to something that undermines the law. Coleman nodded. Fair enough. We'll wait until tomorrow, but then we're riding out regardless. Reed's got maybe a day's head start. Every hour we wait is another mile between us and him. After they left, Caleb found Ayanna in the small room she shared with Sarah. The girl was teaching her younger siblings a game with stones and string. Something Apache, probably. Something that connected them to the heritage Ayanna carried. The ranchers are forming a posse, going after Reed. Ayanna looked up sharply. When? Tomorrow. They wanted my blessing, but I told them I'd talk to Morrison first. Forget Morrison. Tell them I'm going with them. Absolutely not. Why? Because I'm a woman? Because I'm Apache? Or because you're afraid of what I'll do if I find him? All of those reasons. And because those men don't know you, don't trust you, you'd be a liability. I'm the only one who knows exactly what Reed's fungus looks like. The only one who can identify his cultivation methods. If they find his cache or his camp, they'll need someone who can recognize evidence. That's me. She was right, but Caleb hated that she was right. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when he killed Martha, when he tried to make you all think this land was cursed so nobody would look for human cause. When he decided women's lives were expendable in service of his greed, it's absolutely my fight. Sarah spoke up from where she sat with her siblings. Let her go, Papa. She needs to do this. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand that Ayanna won't rest until this is finished. I understand that keeping her here when she wants to fight is like caging something wild. And I understand that sometimes people have to do dangerous things to protect the people they love. The wisdom in his 10-year-old daughter's voice broke something in Caleb. When had she become so old? So certain about hard truths that most adults refuse to face. If you go, he said to Ayanna, you follow Coleman's orders.
You don't break from the group. You don't take unnecessary risks. And you come back. Because these children need you. And, he paused, surprised by his own honesty, because I need you. Ayana's expression softened slightly. I'll be careful. I promise. Your promises are starting to stack up. Make sure you can keep them all. That evening, Caleb brought the matter to Morrison. The judge listened with his usual careful attention, then sat back and sighed. Officially, I can't sanction a private posse. It opens too many legal complications. But unofficially, Reed is dangerous, and the law's resources are limited. If concerned citizens want to assist in locating a fugitive, I can't stop them, as long as they don't take justice into their own hands. And if they find him, if he resists, then they defend themselves accordingly. But I want him alive, Caleb. I want him in front of a jury. I want the world to hear what he did and why. Dead men can't confess, can't implicate others who might have helped, can't provide closure for the families of their victims. I'll make sure Coleman understands. And Miss Ayana? She's going with them? She insists. Then tell her the same thing. Reed alive is worth more than Reed dead, no matter how much she wants revenge. But revenge wasn't quite the right word for what Ayana wanted. Caleb was beginning to understand that. It wasn't personal vendetta. It was something larger. The need to prove that people like her mattered, that their testimony could bring down powerful men, that justice could extend beyond the boundaries of race and class. She was fighting for every woman who'd ever been dismissed or ignored or erased. And Reed was the symbol of all the systems that had allowed that erasure to continue. The posse gathered at dawn. 8 men on horseback, armed and provisioned for a week in rough country. They didn't question Ayana's presence. Coleman had apparently vouched for her, explaining her skills and knowledge. Several men still looked skeptical, but they kept their objections quiet. Caleb walked Ayana to her horse. Someone, probably Coleman, had provided a decent mare and proper tack. She checked the cinch and stirrups with practiced efficiency. You grew up with horses, Caleb observed. Apache children learn to ride before they can walk properly. Horses mean survival, mobility, the difference between escape and capture. What else did they teach you? Tracking, reading sign, moving through country without leaving trace. How to find water and shelter and food, where white men see only emptiness. She looked at him directly. How to hunt men who've done wrong, and make them answer for it. That's not your job. That's what the law is for. The law is for people the law protects. For everyone else, there's only what we can do for ourselves. She swung into the saddle with fluid grace. From horseback, she looked different, more herself, as if being on that mare reconnected her to some essential part of her identity that walking diminished. 2 weeks, Caleb said. If you're not back in 2 weeks, I'm coming after you. You have children to protect. You can't leave them. Then come back, so I don't have to choose. She nodded once. Then the posse moved out, 8 riders and 1 woman, disappearing into the country that had swallowed Reed the night before. Caleb watched until they were out of sight. Then he returned to the boarding house where his children waited, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The posse rode hard for 3 days, following leads and rumors. Reed had been seen in a mining camp 50 miles north. Or maybe it was 80 miles west at a trading post. Or perhaps he'd circled back south toward the Idaho border. Every report sent them in different directions
until Coleman called a halt. We're chasing ghosts. Need to think like Reed instead of reacting to rumors. They made camp in a canyon that offered shelter from wind and good sight lines for security. While the men saw to horses and firewood, Ayanna studied the map Coleman had brought. "He's not running random," she said. "Look at the pattern. Every sighting is near water, near towns with telegraph access. He's watching us, watching to see who's hunting him and how organized we are." "So what's his play?" "He's buying time, waiting for us to give up or make a mistake. Then he'll double back." "Back where? His ranch is being watched." "Not his ranch, the Hart Ranch. That's where his evidence is. That's where witnesses are. He can't truly escape until he's eliminated both." Henderson, who'd been listening, spoke up. "You're saying he's going to come back and try to kill Hart's family?" "I'm saying it's what I'd do if I were him. Remove the threat. Destroy any remaining evidence. Create chaos that makes people doubt the charges. Then disappear while everyone's scrambling." "That's a hell of a risk, coming back to where everyone's looking for him." "It's a calculated risk, and Reed is nothing if not calculating. He's patient. He'll wait until we're far enough away, until the marshal gets pulled to some other emergency, until guards get complacent. Then he'll strike." Coleman swore. "We need to send someone back. Warn Hart." "Won't help. He already knows the danger. What we need to do is set a trap, use the ranch as bait, and wait for Reed to take it." "Using children as bait? That's cold." "That's smart. Reed thinks he's hunting. Let's remind him what it's like to be hunted." They debated strategy through the night. Eventually, Coleman agreed to Ayanna's plan with modifications. Half the posse would continue the visible search, making noise and being seen. The other half would circle back quietly and set up surveillance on the Hart Ranch. When Reed appeared, they'd take him. Ayanna would lead the covert group. Her tracking skills and ability to move unseen made her the logical choice. Coleman didn't like splitting his forces, but he liked the idea of Reed succeeding even less. 3 days later, Ayanna and 3 men were hidden in the woods overlooking the Hart Ranch. It was strange seeing the place from this angle. Strange watching Caleb move through his daily routines while she hid in shadows. The children were still in town, safely at the boarding house. That had been Caleb's condition. He'd be bait, but not them. She'd argued against him staying too, argued he should be with his children where it was safe, but he'd refused. "This is my land, my fight. I'm not hiding while other people defend it." So now he walked the property alone, checking fences and tending animals, presenting himself as a vulnerable target. And Ayanna watched from concealment, rifle ready, waiting for Reed to make his move. 4 days passed, then 5. The men with her grew restless. "Maybe we're wrong. Maybe he's really running." "He'll come," Ayanna said with absolute certainty. On the 6th night, she woke from light sleep with the knowledge that something had changed. Not sound, not sight. Just that subtle shift in air pressure that meant another human was present. She touched the shoulder of the man on watch, pointed toward the barn. He looked but shook his head, saw nothing. Ayanna slipped from camp, silent as thought, moved through darkness using skills learned as a child, skills that had kept her alive when soldiers came, skills that had made her invisible when visibility meant death. She found him near the house, Reed, dressed in dark clothes, carrying a can of what she assumed was kerosene, planning to burn it, burn the evidence, burn the witnesses, make it look like accident or curse or anything except murder. He was alone, confident, certain no one had anticipated this move. Ayanna could have shot him, could have ended it right there. But Morrison's words echoed. Reed alive was worth more than Reed dead.
They needed his confession, needed him to testify about who else might have been involved, needed the closure that only truth could provide. She whistled softly. The signal. The men would be converging now, surrounding the house, cutting off escape. Reed froze, spun toward the sound. His hand went to his belt, where a pistol hung. "Don't," Ayanna said, stepping into moonlight. Her rifle was raised and steady. "It's over, Reed. You're surrounded." His face in the pale light was a study in rage and fear. "The Indian whore. I should have killed you when you first arrived." "Yes, you should have. That was your mistake. Underestimating me because of what I am." Thinking I'd be easy to dismiss or destroy. How many other women did you underestimate before they died? They were obstacles, nothing more. They were people. Eleanor was a person. Martha was a person. Your own wife was a person. And you killed them for property and profit, and the sick satisfaction of proving you could. Reed's hand inched toward his pistol. Ayanna tracked the movement. "You won't shoot. You need me alive. I heard you talking. You need my testimony." "I need you alive. I don't need you uninjured. I'm Apache. We're very good at making people talk through pain." That stopped him. The casual certainty in her voice, the knowledge that she'd grown up in a culture where torture of enemies was accepted practice. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You've spent your whole life around soft, civilized people who flinch at blood. I'm not those people. I've watched my family butchered. I've survived things that would break you. Hurting you to get truth? That wouldn't even register as difficult." Footsteps announced the arrival of Coleman and the others. They formed a loose circle around Reed, rifles ready. "Jonah Reed," Coleman said formally, "you're under arrest for the murders of Eleanor Hart, Martha Whitfield, and 5 other women. You'll be taken back to Clarkston to stand trial." "You have no authority to arrest me. You're not law." "We're citizens making a citizen's arrest. Law says that's legal when we witness someone attempting arson. And we all just watched you approaching that house with accelerant. So yeah, we've got authority." Reed's eyes darted, calculating angles and odds. He was trapped, but not finished. Ayanna could see him thinking, planning some desperate move. "Don't," she said quietly. "Whatever you're considering, don't. You've lost. Accept it." "I've lost nothing. You think this will stick? You think people will believe an Indian over me? I'll walk. My lawyers will tear you apart. And then I'll make sure you regret ever coming to Montana." "That's a threat against a witness," Coleman noted. "We all heard it. That'll look real good at your trial." Reed's control finally snapped. He grabbed for his pistol in a movement that was fast, but not fast enough. 3 rifles fired simultaneously. Reed dropped, blood spreading across his chest. Ayanna hadn't fired. Her rifle remained steady, still aimed at where Reed had been standing. She'd wanted him alive, wanted his confession, wanted him to face public accountability for his crimes. But the men with her had different training, different instincts. They'd seen a weapon being drawn, and they'd reacted the way frontier men reacted, with overwhelming force. Coleman knelt beside Reed, checked for pulse, shook his head. "He's gone." Ayanna lowered her rifle slowly, felt something inside her collapse. All that planning, all that hunting. And in the end, it had come down to a panicked grab for a gun and 3 bullets that had ended everything in seconds. "I wanted him alive," she said. "He didn't give us that choice. He drew on armed men.
That's suicide. That's escape. He knew we wouldn't let him go. New trial meant exposure and shame. So he chose this, chose death over accountability. She was right. In that final moment, Reed had decided. Better to die than face what he'd done.
Better to become a martyr or a mystery than a convicted murderer. Caleb emerged from the house, rifle in hand. He'd heard the shots, seen the confrontation from the window. His eyes found Ayanna first, checking she was unharmed, then shifted to Reed's body. "Is it done?" "It's done," Coleman confirmed. "Did he confess?" "No. He drew, and we fired. Never got the chance." Caleb's expression was complicated, relief and disappointment mixed together. "So we'll never know for certain. Never have his words admitting what he did." "We have the evidence, the fungus in his cellar, the documentation he kept, Martha's letters. That's enough." "Is it? Or will people always wonder, always question?" Ayanna understood what he wasn't saying. Without Reed's confession, without his public accountability, there would always be doubt. Always be whispers that maybe they'd gotten it wrong. Maybe killed an innocent man. Maybe the Indian woman had manipulated everyone for her own purposes. "Let them wonder," she said tiredly. "Let them question. I know the truth. You know the truth. The people who matter know. That has to be enough." They wrapped Reed's body and brought it back to Clarkston. Judge Morrison examined the scene reports and the evidence and declared the shooting justified. Self-defense during a citizen's arrest of a fugitive attempting arson. Clean and legal. But clean and legal didn't mean satisfying, didn't mean closure. The town divided predictably. Some believed Reed was guilty. Others insisted he'd been railroaded by an Indian woman with an agenda. The truth became debatable rather than absolute. Morrison did his best. He held a public inquest, presented all the evidence, let witnesses testify. In the end, he ruled Reed responsible for 7 murders. But rulings weren't the same as confessions. Paper wasn't the same as voice. Through it all, Ayanna remained at the boarding house with the children. She'd fulfilled her promise to Martha. Found the killer, brought him to justice, however imperfect that justice was. But she felt hollow, as if the victory had cost something essential. 2 weeks after Reed's death, Morrison called Caleb and Ayanna to his chambers. "I've been reviewing territorial law, specifically laws regarding Native peoples and their status." Ayanna's expression went carefully blank. This was it, the other shoe dropping. They'd let her help catch Reed, but now she'd be sent to a reservation, removed from the family she'd started to care for. But Morrison surprised her. There's a provision, rarely used but legal, allows for indigenous people to be adopted into white families under certain circumstances, gives them limited rights and protections, not full citizenship, but close. Caleb leaned forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if Mr. Hart formally adopts Miss Ayanna as a ward of his family, she can remain here legally, can live under his protection, can testify in court if needed. It's not perfect, but it's something." Ayanna found her voice. "What's the catch?" "She'd have to take an American name for legal purposes, would have to agree to live under Hart's authority, would essentially become his responsibility in the eyes of the law. So I'd trade one form of bondage for another. You'd trade uncertainty for security. I know it's not ideal, but ideal doesn't exist in this territory. Not for someone in your position." Caleb looked at her. "It's your choice. I won't force this." Ayanna thought about the children, about Sarah and Thomas and Ruth, who'd started to heal under her care, about the family that had formed from broken pieces, about having a place in a world that insisted
She didn't belong anywhere. What name would I use? Something simple, something that doesn't draw attention. You'd keep Ayana at home. But in legal documents, in public, you'd need something American. She thought of Martha, the woman who'd saved her, who'd tried to give her a place in a world that didn't want her. Martha Hart, she said. Legally, I'll be Martha Hart, but the children will know me as Ayana, and I'll never forget which is real and which is performance. Morrison nodded. I'll draw up the papers. The adoption was finalized 3 days later. A brief ceremony in Morrison's chambers with Mrs. Patterson as witness. Signatures on documents that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. Ayana became Martha Hart in the eyes of law, remained Ayana in her own heart. They returned to the ranch a week later. The children ran through rooms that had been empty too long. Caleb walked the property, checking what needed repair. And Ayana stood in the kitchen where she'd first appeared, uninvited but necessary. Sarah found her there. Are you staying? Really staying? Really staying. Promise? I promise. No more leaving. This is home now. Sarah threw her arms around Ayana's waist, held on with the desperate strength of a child who'd lost too much. I was scared you'd go. Everyone always goes. Not me. You're stuck with me. Good. We need you. That evening, after the children were in bed, Caleb and Ayana sat on the porch watching stars emerge. The same stars that had watched 7 women die. The same stars that had witnessed Reed's exposure and death. The same stars that would watch this strange new family try to build something from rubble. Do you regret it? Caleb asked. Coming here? All of this? I regret Martha died. Regret I couldn't save her. But coming here? Meeting you and the children? No, I don't regret that. Even though Reed escaped real justice? Even though he died without confessing? Justice isn't always what we want it to be. Sometimes it's just stopping the bleeding. Sometimes it's just surviving another day. We stopped him. That's something. Is it enough? It has to be, because there's no other ending available. They sat in silence, not uncomfortable, just 2 people who'd been through fire and somehow emerged on the other side. The children call you Mama too, Caleb said. Ruth started it. The others followed. I know. I heard. Does it bother you? No. It honors Eleanor. Acknowledges they loved her first, and still do. I'm not replacing her. I'm just addition. Extra mother for children who need all the love they can get. What about us? What are we? It was the question that had been hovering unspoken for weeks. This connection that had formed through shared purpose and danger. This partnership that had saved his family and given her one. We're family, Ayana said simply. Maybe not in the traditional way. Maybe not in any way the law recognizes properly. But we're people who chose each other, who fought for each other. That makes us something. Something that's vague. Good. Vague gives us room to figure it out as we go. Caleb smiled, reached across the space between them, took her hand. I can work with vague. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but possible. They'd face prejudice, face questions, face the ongoing challenge of being a family that didn't fit any standard mold. But they'd also face it together. White rancher and Apache warrior. 3 children learning that love wasn't limited by blood. A family built from loss and choice and stubborn refusal to give up. Somewhere on the hill, 6 graves held their eternal watch. Eleanor and Martha and 4 others. Women who'd died before justice found them. But their deaths had meaning now, had led to Reed's exposure, had brought Ayanna to this family. That didn't make their deaths good, didn't make the loss acceptable, but it meant something had been built from the ashes, something strong and strange and worth defending. Ayanna looked up at the stars, thought about her parents, about Martha, about all the people who'd loved her and left her. They'd approve, she said. Who? The dead, Eleanor and Martha and my parents. They'd look at this situation and see hope, see people trying. That's all anyone can ask, that we try. Then we'll keep trying. Yes, we'll keep trying. And in the Montana darkness, surrounded by ghosts and memories and the fragile promise of tomorrow, that felt like enough. The wind carried no voices tonight, just the clean, cold smell of snow and pine and possibility. In the house behind them, 3 children slept safely. In the valley around them, a community slowly accepted that truth was more complicated than they'd wanted to believe. And in the space between 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds, something new was growing. Not replacement, not forgetting, but the next chapter. The story that continued after tragedy tried to end it. They sat until stars began to fade toward dawn, then went inside together, to the family they'd built, to the life they'd earned, to whatever came next, together.